Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Value Metrics podcast. And today we are here with Jayesh Menon, who is one of the most transformative leaders in the space of HR. Jayesh, we would love for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Pooja. I appreciate you guys inviting me for this podcast. Jayesh Menon, I'm currently based in Singapore. I'm originally from India. I've lived in Singapore for almost 14 years now. I'm currently heading HR as a VP of HR for one of the Danaher operating companies. Prior to this, I used to be in business. I used to be the country general manager for Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy, one of the businesses for them. I was also the HR director for them for the region.
Beautiful. All right, Jayesh. You have a huge experience in the HR space. What are the biggest shifts that you have witnessed in how organizations have been approaching talent in the last 5 years and how AI has contributed to that?
AI is like an intern which does not sleep. So it's out there. It works very hard, and that's a shift that you've seen. So right from hiring and when I say hiring, it's the entire process of sourcing candidates to interviewing candidates to scheduling candidates, everything, right? You would see that shift happening. So that's what I would say is the biggest shift that I've seen in the last few years happening in the talent space using technology and specifically AI.
So, what's the most common misconception that you hear from HR leaders about AI, specifically in the hiring space?
All right. I would say one of the biggest misconceptions that people have, and I don't think it's everywhere, is that AI is going to create an unbiased uh, method of recruiting people, and it's pretty much like saying that it's like it's the autocorrect is the right way to spell things, right? So it's pretty much like that because AI is not going to correct your red flags. If your red flags are there, it's not going to make it a green flag. So it's not going to change it. It's very simple, garbage in, garbage out.
So, do you think AI actually has the potential to replace recruiters?
So when it comes to AI, I would say think of it more like what do you say, more of an Iron Man than a Terminator, right? So it probably will help make the recruiters look a little bit more cooler than replacing them, at least for now. I still remember the first time when I started my career in HR about 20 plus years ago. We used to give that big advertisements in Times of India and stuff like that, and we used to get all those paper resumes. We used to literally sleep in office, the entire floor covered with stacks of resumes, and we would go manually one by one of it. And again, as an intern and stuff like that, you just the whole night you're actually going through the resumes, right? From that to today using ATS and all that stuff, we have come a long way. I don't think we would lose jobs as yet if we know how to work closely with technology and augment well with that.
How do you balance AI and human element in an organization?
One scoop of technology and probably two scoops of human empathy. Because I guess we probably think about it, right? We are what probably 86, 90 billion neurons, a human being, right? And a lot of it is that humanness, that empathy. So if you mix technology with that empathy, that's probably the best recipe to have, and that's what I would say is probably the best way to coexist and work closely with AI.
But does a resume give a clear picture on who the person is?
See, resumes are basically a glorified version of your profile, Instagram profile. That's what it is, right? Most of the time. I mean, so resumes would never be you will never predict 100% the quality of a candidate. It helps you to probably get an interview, but beyond that, resumes probably do nothing, and trusting resumes 100% is not going to be helpful at all. In fact, a lot of people, we have seen, especially now with the technology coming up, you would see a lot of people trying to add in those certain words of job descriptions and all that stuff into the resume, and that's a very common phenomenon, so that you can kind of game the ATS and things like that. So that's very common. So I would say absolutely not.
Got it. So we know that people have been inflating this information. AI plays an important role in this inflation as well, right? So, but during the assessments, what are the different ways through which you safeguard the whole hiring process?
It's a very tricky question, Pooja, because if you ask me from my personal experience, you generally know an employee three times in their entire lifespan of working with you. One is when you hire them, or in the process of hiring. Second is when you actually work with them. And third is when they are leaving the organization, or probably after they have left the organization, right? So there is no 100% foolproof way. But what you could do is you could try to minimize the risk, and maximize your confidence level in terms of how good the candidate is. So things like you can do is obviously some kind of a peer references, and sometimes unfortunately a lot of references are being given of people whom you really know well, so it's a little challenge, but you can still try to get a little bit of that, or listen to subtle cues when you actually do reference checks. Some gaming systems, gaming softwares, or simulation softwares are actually can, and again, I wouldn't say 100%, it does. Again, there's a cultural element and cultural context. A lot of time these softwares are made in a certain cultural context, and it doesn't capture all the cultures and all the contexts together. So that's another option, but again, another way to look at it. And then probably some amount of a very strong psychometric test. Again, there is controversies around it, but I would say up to some extent, those psychometric tests can really also help. So a combination of these factors, again, I don't think any of it put together would be a perfect correlation, but at least would help you up to some extent in terms of having a higher level of confidence in terms of getting the right candidate.
So, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge that you feel is happening in the space of hiring right now?
Oh, companies are becoming a lot more data oriented. And in the process of becoming data oriented, or score cards and all that stuff oriented, um, the time to hire or time to fill, and whatever different organizations might use, because it hits a certain KPI, might be one of the reasons, one of the biggest challenges that I've at least heard from many other HR practitioners and also hiring managers. Because there is sometimes it becomes like a factory method. I want to hire, I want to move on, I want to hire, I want to move on. And that kind of the quality of hire becomes an issue, because people just want to fill a role and then move on to something else. Especially in organizations where some of these are outsourced and things like that.
How do you cater to the challenge of finding the right cultural fit? And what happens if it goes wrong?
Right. The word cultural fit is a very can have different meanings for different people, and it often is can actually have negative repercussions on hiring sometimes, because a lot of time, what does culture fit means? Culture fit means a lot of time it gets misconstrued as, do I speak the same language of the boss? Do I enjoy going for a drink or a soju or a baiju or a whiskey or a wine after work, because that's what my company culture is, to relax after work? Is culture means I have to be an extrovert, because and I have to participate in every single team building, even if I have absolutely no interest in participating in a team building, because as an introvert I hate going for something like that. So I think we have to be very careful about the word cultural fit, because a lot of time it comes with a good intention, but as it gets implemented, it goes wrong over there, Pooja. And I would say that's a bit of an issue to work on. So I would probably say more of a cultural enhancement, because culture fit is always has an element of bias into that.
So, as an organization, how do we share the right set of values or the right belief system, or how do we brand ourselves correctly?
When it comes to values and culture, there's three elements that I look at. One is your personal values. And that's one of the things that you alluded to, candidates looking at whether it aligns with your personal values, right? Then there is an organizational value, which is, every company would have, you know, certain behaviors which are more appreciated than certain behaviors, the other behaviors, right? And then the third part is a bit of what I call the cultural context and I always say this because this is an element which a lot of companies and individuals do miss that part, because you have a national context, you have a national culture. And so when you hire a candidate from a certain country, when your corporate office and most of your senior leaders are probably from a certain culture, it may not 100% align. Now, so I would say being very, so from a company side and individual side, let me tackle that. From an organization side, I think it is very, very important that you actually speak about your culture, the real culture, right? And no company is perfect. Every company has great stuff, and every company has opportunities to certain things improve. Have a very honest conversation during the hiring process. I do that every single time. I still remember one of my previous managers, for example, when I was getting hired in one of my previous organizations, the interview, it was a 1 hour plus interview, and about 40 minutes of the interview, the hiring manager spoke exclusively about the key values which the company was actually they've just launched those values. He actually put it over there. He said, can you actually, how would you define these values? Can you talk a little bit about that? So in the process of doing that, what happened is that I started really enjoying that conversation, and there was no like right or wrong answer, but we were having a proper conversation. So I think that honest conversation is important from the company side.
So, when there's so many unknowns, how do you truly create a high performance team?
Emotional safety, I would say, is the most important element in terms of creating a high performing team. So once a person comes on board, if you are part of the team, creating that emotional comfort, emotional safety net, that is very important. And why the emotional safety net is important is so that I like, imagine if I'm joining an organization new, I should be able to share my thoughts without fear of repercussions. Now, when I'm saying sharing my thoughts, doesn't mean destructive thoughts, but constructive thoughts without fear of repercussions, with the rest of the team members. So once you establish that minimum level of emotional safety, then everything else get built on it, right? And then on top of that, having a very strong shared purpose, right? And this is important for every individual. Why do we get motivated to wake up in the morning and go to work? It is, there's an individual purpose. And when that individual purpose actually coincides with collective purpose of the team, then it makes a great engaged organization.
How do you truly measure this return that you make on these investments in people in terms of the human capital? And what are the areas that you would expect should reflect in the culture if you made that investment?
A lot of time, human investment on human capital is considered to be a bit of a soft investment, where people would say that it's difficult to measure the return of investment, right? And I don't completely agree on that, because you can measure it, right? Look at it, for example. Can you measure team health? very clearly you can measure team health today, right? Engagement. Again, engagement has a direct correlation on increase in shareholder value. So, of course, if you measure engagement, you can measure. You know, use things like net promoter scores, right? Look at retention post, let's say, 90 days of onboarding the person. And then there are tools like, for example, sentiment AI tools, which measures the sentiment, which measures the mood of the organization and things like that. So there are many tools out in the market which clearly helps you to measure the return of investment on human capital. But you would see a strong correlation between these measurements that I spoke about and in terms of financial and other shareholder values.
But when we look at the other end of the spectrum, when we're trying to hire people, how do you measure that if this person has the amount of EQ that is needed in the organization to evolve, or if this person has the amount of empathy which is needed to operate great in a team like this? So, are there any ways to evaluate candidates on those softer aspects too?
Probably the most missing thing in today's, or the thing that they would focus a lot today, is that emotional and social quotient in an individual. Psychometric test is a good way to look at it. It gives you some element of it. Second is make sure that you invest in enough of conversations and allow a bit of storytelling. Every single time when you ask and allow people to narrate a particular story of an instance or anything like that, that story comes along with certain emotions and the humane factors, which you probably will be able to probe in a bit further and see whether that element of emotional quotient and social intelligence and all that stuff is there. And it probably works. It's funny, right? Because when you ask this question, it's like there are many people who are great in writing a Python code, but are pretty terrible in actually writing an email. And if you had been able to assess them quite well in the beginning, you probably would have figured that out, that they're great at their technical skills, but terrible in terms of interaction. So storytelling is a very powerful method, which often gets ignored in interviews, but I would say it's a very powerful method if we can employ it very well.
Now, with the changing generation, we have worked with millennials. I come from that generation. So our hiring processes were very different. Our expectations from a job were very different. But that has shifted with Gen Zs. Their expectations from a job is very different. They focus a lot on quality of life. Um, so, have you seen any shift in the values or in the overall culture of an organization as the generation is also shifting?
What I've seen in Gen Z or any other new generations that we talk about in the workforce is that they are skeptical. They are very skeptical. They're probably not as out there and trusting anything that you say. But they are very savvy. They are very savvy about things. They expect AI, for example. Um, they expect AI. They expect transparency and feedback. Most of the 68 or so percent of Gen Z did expect AI in the process, but they also want, but also about 71% of those folks want a human touch too. So, it's an interesting one because many often organizations, either want to be high touch or high tech, whereas Gen Z probably wants a mix of both high touch and high tech, and that's it's a little it's a different way of thinking, but but I find it actually quite interesting because it brings in a proper brilliant hybrid model into the system, and if we can do it well in a very cost effective way, I think it's beautiful.
So, if you have the ability to see 5 to 10 years ahead, um, can you foresee any big shifts in terms of how we're going to assess and secure this top talent?
If you ask me in a single sentence, I would say it's going to take away the time for the HR folks or the interviewers to actually have a sip of coffee in between the interviews. It's going to be that fast. The second element that I see is there is going to be a lot of emphasis not just on the hiring, because in the past it was so saying you hire the person comes on board, the job is finished, right? But the quality of the hire is probably going to get measured a lot more. So it's not just the hire. I bring on the person, I place the person on board, but in the future, who are the best recruiters? Who are the best hiring managers? Who are the best interviewers? Under which, you remember these are so many data points. Though I'm only talking about three variables over here, these three variables, imagine x, this multiplied by the number of interviewers, number of sources, number of recruiters that come in. This is creating so much of data point. But AI would be able to analyze it into such an extent that you would probably find the right mix of recruiters, hiring managers, interviewers, and probably the which led to a very successful pool of candidates, or candidates who have really done well.
So, how do we build a culture of this constant cognitive agility in the organization? How do we make sure that we are ready to coexist with AI, that we're ready to cope up, that we're ready to look in the future and to decide as humans that this is what we want eventually?
I would say, Pooja, that in a world where tools do change, let's say every 6 months, um, the ability to unlearn and relearn, um, and relearn most of the things, or beat even deep expertise. I would say the ability to learn and unlearn would be one clear cognitive agility, yeah, that would be considered as the superpower of the future, right? I mean, this reminds me of one of the report, which is still, I'm sure, accessible from the World Economic Forum, 2025 report or something like that, which talks about cognitive flexibility among the top five critical skills. The tip that I would say is you don't need to know everything, just how to learn anything.
I just have one last question from you now. So there'll be a lot of other CHROs and HR professionals who'll be watching this podcast. What is your biggest advice to them, specifically for people who are looking to integrate AI into the overall hiring process in the talent space?
I would say start small, stay human, use AI to screen, sort, and predict, but don't outsource empathy, right? You run pilots, you audit for bias, you train your teams, not just your tech teams. And if you do all these things, I would say probably you would be able to better integrate AI, at least into hiring.
Thank you, Jayesh. And to all the people watching this podcast, if you love content like this, please subscribe to our channel so we can bring leaders like Jayesh more often, and we can debunk different myths around AI. We can talk how we can transform as an organization. How can we be people first company as well? So thank you so much for sticking with us. And Jayesh, truly, truly grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Pooja. Appreciate that.